Clara Oswald, probably the most universally hated Doctor Who companion of recent years. As someone that has always loved the character, I simply don't understand why this is. In this video, I'm going to be fighting the case for the Impossible Girl, providing counter-arguments for some of the most common arguments against her, and explaining why, on a personal level, she's a character that I have grown to appreciate so much. So first things first, let's just go back to the beginning, Series 7 Part 2. I will be honest, yeah, it wasn't that great. I mean, Clara isn't awful in Series 7 Part 2, but at the same time, I definitely agree that her development as a character is hindered by the whole Impossible Girl story arc. It's hard, I think, for a character to be both the companion and the story arc simultaneously every single week, and that does take its toll on the character, definitely. I think the main problem really is that she's never properly introduced, because she's first in Asylum and the Snowmen. By the time we've got to the Bells of St. John, the third introduction story of that one iteration of Clara, she doesn't really feel like a new character or a fresh character, and she isn't really handled like a brand new character as well. A little bit like how she's always been there for the Doctor, supposedly, throughout all his incarnations. It's as if Clara has just literally always been there for the audience, and by the time she's been introduced for the third time, we've got to know her. So yes, I mean, I do get that, don't get me wrong. I think there is an effort made in some stories, for example, The Rings of Akaten, to add in some of Clara's backstory. And to be fair, when this is done properly, it does work well. Bits like Clara's family in the time of the Doctor, like I say, her mum and dad in The Rings of Akaten. But the main problem is the consistency, well, the lack of it, the inconsistency. There's a lack of cohesion across lots of Clara's stories, especially in Series 7 Part 2. Some stories do delve into her backstory, others don't. And I think that's because of the different writers treating her as both a character, but probably, primarily as the story arc element, the equivalent of a Missy cameo each week, or having Bad Wolf graffitied somewhere. So yeah, Series 7 is not Clara's best moments, admittedly. But putting that aside, from the day of the Doctor onwards, I do love Clara, I really do. Yes, there is no real reason for her to randomly become a school teacher in universe. It's more of a behind-the-scenes tribute to, Ian and Barbara, basically, from 1963, which then turned into something else for Series 8. She became a teacher at Coal Hill. And to be honest, I'm glad that the opportunity to do this was made available to the character, because having her as a teacher at Coal Hill School is definitely preferable to having her as a nanny with two very irritating children back in Series 7 Part 2. Again, yes, it's a jarring shift between those two sides of the character, almost two different characters, basically, the Series 7 Clara and the Day of the Doctor to Series 8 and 9 Clara as well. But like I say, I'm glad they did it. I'm glad Moffat kind of made up for his mistakes there, the mistake being having Clara be both the story arc and the companion. And from Series 8 onwards, I think she does work. I do think that she could have just as easily been another character for Series 8. She could have been played by a different actress, a whole new companion devised. But the problem there, then, is that you lose all that established character and backstory that we got in Series 7, because you need that to have the uneasy Doctor-companion dynamic that Moffat was clearly going for with the 12th Doctor in Series 8. There's no reason for a new companion to join the 12th Doctor so early on in his run, when he's being so sarcastic and generally quite unpleasant. So Clara had to stay instead, and it's only because of her backstory and experience with the 11th Doctor that that's able to work. It's a slight paradox, yes. I mean, it would be so nice if we could just kind of retcon the majority of Series 7 Part 2, to be honest. But at the same time, it's contradictory. You need it there to enable all the stuff that comes in Series 8, which I do appreciate. I really love what Moffat did with the character in Series 8 and 9. She's the point of identification, for instance, for the audience having to cope with a massive behind-the-scenes change. Yes, it's just a new Doctor, okay, But the 12th Doctor is so different to what we've seen before, especially in the revived series. It's a very big change, and frankly we did need Clara there as that one constant element in the show, keeping us all going and keeping us all interested, really, I think. And then there's also that thing about her constantly trying to balance her life at home and her life in the TARDIS, and kind of wondering whether she should really be travelling with the Doctor anymore, whether she can cope with this change, whether it's going to be so monumental in the long run that she will actually have to leave the TARDIS, and she does do that in Kill the Moon because it does get too much. And kind of on a personal level, really, this was something that I appreciated a lot at the time, not only because it hadn't really been done in Doctor Who history to this extent before, but also because I could relate to Clara's dilemma in a silly sort of way. I'd just moved house when Series 8 was being broadcast. In fact, we actually moved just the day before Series 8 aired. And like Clara with the 11th Doctor, you know, I'd lived in one place for the whole of my life up to that point. That had become the familiar, the norm, the standard. And suddenly I found myself, due to circumstances beyond my control, in a new, unfamiliar setting, unfamiliar circumstances, just like Clara with the 12th Doctor. And kind of across those first 12 weeks of living in a new area and learning to adapt, like Clara, I had to learn how to adapt and kind of how to make the most of this new chapter of my life, I suppose, really. And of course, like Clara's journey with the Doctor, it had its ups and downs. Of course that happened. But I mean that's kind of unique to me, really. That's my own personal experience of it, and other people perhaps won't have got that quite so much from it. But definitely for me, that's what I got from it, the main thing that I got from it. And also I think that Clara's kind of home versus TARDIS dilemma is a representation of what it is to be a Doctor Who fan, essentially. Balancing normal day-to-day life with friends and family, with the time you spend in the world of the Doctor as a fan, you know, on the internet, social media, watching the show live or on DVDs or whatever else. And again, kind of growing up as a teenager, that's something that I've found I've had to deal with, inevitably, balancing the social life side of it, if you will, with Doctor Who, particularly at a time when it isn't really fashionable to watch Doctor Who. I don't suppose it's ever fashionable to watch Doctor Who as a teenager, but definitely around this time when the show isn't quite as big a thing as it used to be, perhaps, like back in the Tennant and Billy Piper days. So that's something else that I got from it as well. As I say, perhaps other people won't have got that, but it's just another interesting spin on the idea, an interesting interpretation, I suppose. Ultimately, what Clara chooses is life with the Doctor over her life on Earth, and it does cost her. She loses Danny Pink, and of course, I mean, he himself, he suffers as a consequence, he dies. And ultimately in Series 9, Clara brings about her own downfall, and continuing that extended metaphor, basically that's sort of representative of the self-destructive aspect of fandom, really. Having Clara represent fandom, the balance between normal life and being a fan, and she chooses being a fan over her normal life, and it costs her, and it leads to her downfall. And that's a kind of universal message, I suppose. So, you know, maybe I'm just going off onto a tangent here. Maybe this isn't what Stephen Moffat meant at all. But like I say, it's just one interpretation. It's what I've got from Clara, from the character. But apart from all of that, I just think that Clara's journey throughout Series 8 and 9 in particular, forgetting about Series 7 for a moment, is genuinely captivating and genuinely interesting and entertaining. I really enjoyed following her character on that journey, regardless of my own experiences. Just following her get to know this new incarnation of the Doctor, and then becoming more and more like him, dangerously so. The kind of turning point in Series 8 is around about Mummy on the Orient Express, that mark, when she decides that travelling with the Doctor is an addiction for her. Then in Flatline, the next episode, she basically becomes the Doctor, and that's the start of the whole hybrid thing that develops into Series 9, when she becomes part of the hybrid with the Doctor, and that costs her. And even though her initial debut was a bit muddled, admittedly, Clara's exit from the show is handled in such a perfect way, it really is. I was just watching Face the Raven just the other day as part of my hashtag Capaldathon rewatch of the whole of the 12th Doctor's era in preparation for his upcoming swan song at Christmas. And just wow, that episode is so good. It grows on me every time I rewatch it. But in particular, Clara and the Doctor's final moments together, there's that kind of turning point in that story where her fate is set in stone, and you know she's going to die. You know she's got to face the Raven. And, oh gosh, that final scene, final lines they say to each other are just so perfect. I mean, I think Sarah Dollard is an absolute genius, one of Doctor Who's best writers. Such a great story. And then you get the same thing in Hell Bent, when it's the Doctor's turn to suffer. Because that's the other thing, that the main thing that irritates lots of fans is that Clara's return in Hell Bent they find was unnecessary, and I would argue completely against that. I think it makes perfect sense. Because assuming that the pairing of the Doctor and Clara is the fulfillment of the hybrid prophecy that we get littered throughout episodes of Series 9, to me, my understanding of it is that both sides have to suffer, so that they are collectively the hybrid, but in order for the hybrid to be fully destroyed, if you like, both the Doctor and Clara have to be, completely separated, and they have to pay the price for what they've done. So inevitably you get two goodbye scenes. You get Clara, and she pays the price through death, but that leaves the Doctor, half of the hybrid, still alive and kicking, and very angry with the Time Lords about what's happened to Clara, and, there's no knowing what he would have done in Hell Bent had he not been silenced. And the way he is silenced, the way he has to pay the price for his part in the coming of the hybrid, is he loses all his memories of Clara. So it's a two-way thing. Cutting the ties between the Doctor and Clara and destroying the hybrid involves Clara paying the price with death and the Doctor paying the price with his memories. That is the absolute, definition. I'm sure of it, having pondered it over many, many times. I'm sure that's what Stephen Moffat would say. So that's why she returns in Hell Bent. That's why she has to return. That's why it makes sense to the story. Admittedly, her going off in her own TARDIS with a Shilder, it's not the best image to leave Series 9 on, especially with that dodgy CGI of the diner exterior. But it does kind of make sense again. I do think that in any other grittier show, it would have been fine for Clara to have a cruel, painful death. But I do agree with Stephen Moffat that Doctor Who is an optimistic show. It's too optimistic at heart to present Clara's ultimate fate as anything less than positive and optimistic. You do get the best of both worlds. I mean, she does still die. I don't think there's any impact lost in that regard, but you just kind of view it from a different angle. The angle of her enjoying lots of other adventures, almost kind of like a dreamlike state that she enjoys in those final moments before her death. The show doesn't focus on the death side of it, the actual death, which is still set in stone. It focuses on Clara's positive side, becoming the Doctor and having her own adventures, the positive fulfillment of where her character arc has been going. So yeah, you get the best of both worlds. Ultimately, she does still die, but the show ends her story on a note which is positive, which is optimistic, and ultimately, for that reason, it's Doctor Who. I think it works. Like I say, in any other grittier show, you could have had a massive, impactful death, but not Doctor Who, I don't think. You couldn't kill off such a much-loved character and just leave it like that. I really don't think that would have been great at all, especially for little kids that have loved that character for a number of years. So that's what I think of Clara Oswald, and that's why I love the character so much. What do you think of Clara, and what do you think of what I've said in this video? Well, let me know in the comments below, and I'll try my best to respond to all of them if you agree, disagree, and we can have a nice little debate about Clara. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching this video. Please like, subscribe, share, all that jazz, and I will see you very soon for some more new content. So, I suppose all that's left to say is run, you clever boys and girls, and remember me. Bye for now, guys.